Hast thou aye been curious about medieval life? Wouldst thou travel back in time if thou couldst? Doth thou regard thou wouldst enjoy it? How long wouldst thou last? This is What If, and hither's what would befall you if thou lived during the Middle Ages. Hear ye, hear ye!
Welcome to the West.
In Middle
Ages.
Hello everyone, my name is Lalangel Ocabangal and I am the first reporter of Group 3. Our report is all about the West in Middle Ages. Now I am going to introduce to you the early Middle Ages. So the early Middle Ages is generally dated from the fall of Western Roman Empire 476 CE to approximately 1000, which marks the beginning of the Romanist period. It includes major art movements and periods, national and regional arts, genres, and revivals. Art historians attempt to classify medieval art into major periods and styles with some difficulty, as medieval regions frequently feature distinct artistic styles such as Anglo-Saxon or Norse. And these are the examples of Anglo-Saxon artistic styles. Before the early Middle Age, population decline, relocation to the countryside, invasion, and migration began and continued in this period. Including various Germanic people, they formed new kingdoms in what remained in the Western Roman Empire. So in the West, there are monasteries were founded as campaigns to Christianize pagan, and it was continued in Europe. When we say pagan, they are the people who worship many gods or worship nature and earth. As literacy declined and printed material became available only to monks and nuns who copied illuminated manuscripts, art became the primary method of communicating narratives, usually of biblical nature, to the masses. So dito daw is, sa period na daw ito is na-decline yung literacy nila, so yung mga manuscripts nila is available na lang daw sa mga monks and nuns dahil sila lang yung may naiwang copy ng mga illuminated na manuscripts. So ito yung example ng illuminated manuscripts. So in early medieval period, they gave more value to decorative arts, including metalwork, ivory carving, and embroidery using precious metals than paintings or sculptures. So sa period na daw ito is mas binibigyan nila ng value yung mga metal works kesa sa paintings or sculptures. Example of metal and inlaid objects are crowns, scepters, and this is the best known of early medieval works that survives to this day. So, ito daw yung siya lang na mga works na nag-exist pa until now from medieval period. So this is one example of metal work in medieval civilization. This is the Visigothic crown. It is from Visigothic Spain. It is made of gold and precious stone. And according to research, it is one of the treasure of Guarazon. The period of European history extending from about 500 to 1400, or to the exact 1500 CE, is traditionally known as the Middle Ages. The term was first used by 15th century scholars to designate the period between their own time and the fall of the Western Roman Empire. During the late antiquity, the early Middle Ages, political, social, economic, and cultural structures were profoundly recognized. reorganized rather, as Roman imperial traditions gave way to those of Germanic people who established kingdoms in the former Western Empire. These developments reached their mature form in 9th century during the reign of Charlemagne and other rulers of Carolingian dynasty who oversaw a broad cultural revival known as the Carolingian Renaissance. So, for your information, in addition, Charlemagne, the emperor of the Romans, he encouraged the Carolingian Renaissance to revive their cultural and intellectual in Europe. So, si Charlemagne daw yung nag-encourage sa mga Carolingian Renaissance na i-revive nila yung kultura nila at ang kanilang intellectual sa Europa. So this is Charlemagne, and the thing that he is holding is the Carolingian dynasty miniature. The period was marked by economic and territorial expansion, demographic and urban growth, the emergence of national identity, and the restructuring of secular and ecclesiastical institutions. So sa period na daw ito nag-mark yung may mga nagaganap na daw na may pagmamayari na daw yung mga lupa. So, kumbaga, yung mga tao daw is parang nag-aangkin na ng mga teritoryo nila or nagkakaroon na ng kasulatan na itong area na ito ay sa akin ito, itong area na ito ay sa kanya ito. Then second, demographic and urban growth. So, dito na daw din daw naging conscious na yung mga tao na sa pagdami ng mga tao at kung ilang yung nadadagdag, ilan din yung mga nababawas. Urban growth, kasali na din daw dito yung mga nagmamigrate ng mga tao na galing sa ibang bansa. The emergence of national identity. So sa period na daw ito, nag-start na din yung may mga identity na daw yung mga bawat bansa. For example, yung Pilipinas, kilala yung Pilipinas dahil yung mga tao ay hospitable or so on. The example is yung US. So yung US is well-known sila or yung identity nila, kilala sila dahil sa yung English language is nag-originate sa kanila and so on. It was also the era of Crusades, Gothic art, and architecture, the Papal Monarchy, the birth of university. So dito na doon din na yung area yung nag-start na yung university. So ito na. The recovery of ancient Greek thoughts and soaring of intellectual achievements of St. Thomas Aquinas. So dito na din daw ni-recover na nila yung ancient Greek thoughts. So parang binalik nila, ni-recover nila, or parang in-apply nila, ganun. And the soaring of intellectual achievements of St. Thomas Aquinas. So dito daw sa period na ito is parang binigyan na nila ng pansin or mas pinalawak pa nila yung intellectual achievements ni St. Thomas Aquinas. Europe indeed suffered disasters of war, famine, and pestilence in 14th century. So yung Europe daw is nag-suffer daw sila ng disaster of war, as in sa period na daw ito ay nagkaroon ng war, famine, and pestilence. So may say famine, scarcity of food, kakulangan sa pagkain, so na ranasan din nila yun, and pestilence. Itong pestilence is matatawag din natin siyang fatal disease na naging epidemic before, na kung sakaling madapuan or makagat ka ng isang peste, o tapos yung bacteria is matagal sa skin mo, magkakaroon ka ng symptoms kagaya ng pananakit ng ulo, pagsusuka, at worse, magkakalagnat ka. So ito daw yung pestilence. So nangyari ito sa kanila. Grabe no, magutom na sila, tapos nagkaroon pa ng epidemic sa kanila, nag-war pa. Grabe. So ito daw siya, nangyari dito sa 14th century. So grabe no, grabe ang kanilang tinanas noon. But many of the underlying social, intellectual, and political structure remain. So, in the brighter side, kahit nangyari yun sa kanila, yung social, intellectual, and political structures nila ay naging intact, hindi nagbago, ganun pa rin siya. Ganun pa rin siya. Hindi talaga, dun yung magandang side na parang hindi na bago sa kanila kahit naranasan nila yung mga ganung mga bagay. In the 15th and 16th century, Europe experienced an intellectual and economic revival. So, as I mentioned earlier, Charlemagne, siya yung nag-encourage sa mga, siya yung isa sa nag-encourage sa mga Carolingian Renaissance na i-revive nila yung culture nila at ang kanilang intellectual. So, nangyari pala ito siya sa 15th and 16th century. So let's proceed to the next topic, feudalism techniques. So the feudalism system, as modern scholars call it, first emerged in France in the 10th century and spread to other lands in 11th century. The word feudal derives from the word fief, which usually denotes an area of land held on conditions. So, yung fief daw, ito daw yung siya yung tinatawag sa isang area. A person who granted a fief to someone was person's lord. So, yung fief daw is pagmamay-ari daw. Ang tinatawag daw sa nagmamay-ari ng isang fief ay lord. Tapos yung mga vassal naman, sila naman daw din yung mga nagiging guardia ng isang lord. Sila yung nagbibigay ng serbisyo sa lord. Sila yung nagbibigay ng safety sa lord. Kumbaga sila yung military ng isang lord. Kings granted out much of their kingdoms as large fief to their nobles, and this in turn granted smaller fiefs to lesser lords, and so on. And this way, a pyramid of mutual support was built up, stretching from king downwards to the lord of a single village. So, alam naman talaga natin na before, na mga kings talaga, na mas malaki talaga yung parang share nila sa isang lugar, mas malaki talaga yung lands nila kesa sa mga lesser lords. Building blocks of fiefs were manors. So according sa research, yung manors daw, ito daw yung sila yung mga may nagmamay-ari ng isang small area ng lands. For example, pero hindi siya kagaya ng isang fief na as in na makaka-farm ka talaga, parang malawak yung lugar ng isang fief, unlike sa manors. Yung manors is tama lang na makapag-build ka ng house mo, gano'n. Small areas lang. So yung mga peasants daw, ito daw yung sila yung mga, kumbaga yung mga trabahante. Sila yung mga nagpa-farm sa isang land. Kumbaga sila yung mga farmers. So, last is the serf peasants. The serf peasants, sila yung mga practical na slaves talaga. So, sobrang practical na pagka-slaves nila, hindi sila pwedeng umalis ng land, ng specific na land na yun na pagmamay-ari ng isang lord. Kahit magpakasal, hindi sila pwede, or ipasa yung trabaho nila sa ibang tao na walang pahintulot sa kanilang lord. Pero on the brighter side, kapag naman sila ay nagkasala or nasa husgado sila, yung lord nila yung magiging lawyer nila. So yung lord nila yung magbibigay ng protection para sa kanila. Kaya pala na hindi basta-basta pinapayagan ng mga lords na kung saan-saan pumunta yung mga serf peasants nila. Kasi nga, yung lord yung magkakaroon ng kasalanan or siya yung magpo-protect pa rin sa mga serf peasants kung sakaling magkakaroon ito ng kasalanan. So, that would be the end of my report. Thank you. and have a good day.
So good day everyone, I am Precious Ferlimi V. Rojo and this is the Medieval Europe and its Zenith, Economic History. Farming is the primary source of the growth of the economy of medieval Europe, but later trade and industry became more important. Towns grew in number and size and merchants became more important too. Like all pre-industrial societies, the main source of their economy is agriculture because they were farmers in those days. The medieval manure, also known as the vale from the Roman villa, was an agricultural estate that was managed and owned by its lords and officials. Most industry in the medieval Europe was carried out on a very small scale and was closely related to farming. Either processing its produce or servicing its needs. So we have here the large-scale industrial units examples, the salt mines of Central Europe, stone quarries in various places, and the shipbuilding, especially in the larger ports. Arsenal at Venice or Venetian Arsenal is an example of shipbuilding. It was a huge complex of shipbuilding and armaments manufacture, employing thousands of workers. Trade. The early medieval period in Europe was a shadow of what has come before under the Roman Empire. Trade is another source of growth of this economy. After the fall of the Roman Empire in the West long distance, trade routes shrank because making overland transport became difficult and expensive, but they used Mediterranean Sea and North Baltic Sea as their main thoroughfares in their trading of products. Trade in the Mediterranean died down gradually in 4th century, but in 7th and 8th century there was an abrupt downturn. Trade in the North Sea and Baltic. The North Sea had for millennia home to coastal shipping on a more local scale than in the Mediterranean. So stout, it is around ships or cargoes used to carry, it is a round ship or cogs used to carry cargoes, and it is a deep-drafted, wide-beamed vessels. So, from 11th century, there was the recovery of the European nation. It is also the beginning of their population. The population began to increase. The volume of the trade expanded, the rise of banking, and the spread of the market economy. So, the next topic is the European nation take shape. The changing role of kings. Germanic kingdoms established in Europe. Charlemagne built a large empire, the Holy Roman Empire. He also united the majority of Western and Central Empire. So English kings established their authority. Invaders arrived and settled in England. But Alfred the Great, the ruler of Kingdom of Wessex, took the lead of resisting the Danes, the Germanic tribes. He defeated the Danes in 886, forced them to agree to peace. But in 9th century, Danish Viking finally invaded England. So, paano yun nangyari? Alfred rules England only in 871 to 889. So he was a cultural leader and a warrior also. He established a school, translated Latin works into Anglo-Saxon. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, it is the records of events in England. William establishes strong central control, 1066 to 1087. William I, also known as William the Conqueror, sometimes William the Bastard. He was the first Norman king of England, and he produced the Domesday Book. It is a basis for assessing taxes for many years. The King's Court created a common law, and it is the French feudal law introduced by the Normans. William the Conqueror. The Magna Carta limits royal power. When we say Magna Carta, it is a great charter and it is a book of King John of England. And it is a royal charter of rights also. Parliament grows in power. When we say parliament, it also talks about the Constitution. William the Conqueror continued the tradition by seeking advices of important churchmen, landowners, and nobles. And he called it the Great Council. The foundations are laid for limited monarchy. So, pumasok nga dito yung parliament or the constitutions. Limited monarchy, a government in which limits one set of the monarch's power. And nag-share dito yung king and the parliaments sa authority and power. So, when Middle Ages ended, France was a unified state. And Louis XIX established a royal courts and produced absolute monarchy, a government in which the monarch has the complete power. So, nag-oppose talaga dito ang absolute monarchy sa limited monarchy. Otto the Great German king in 936. In 962, Otto convinced the Pope to crown him as the Emperor of Romance, and he wanted to dominate Italy and the papacy. So, that's all. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Camila Villamon. To the church authority goals, first, growing religious vitality. Try to ensure that Christians live in accordance with church teaching. So they are trying to ensure that Christians live in accordance with church teachings because it is also important with the help of the church. And also, they call the greater spiritual devotion among the clergy. Next, the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor clash. The Pope, spiritual leader of the Christian world, or in layman's term, the head of the church. So they are the spiritual leader that can lead to the Christian world to be a better human, or in the layman's term, the head of the church, the leader that has a rules na kailangan sundin. So, Pope Gregory VII, the most supporter of reform, became the Pope in 1073. So, he was known as the most supporter of reform na naging Pope noong 1073. Next is in the church theory, both Emperor and Pope were chosen by God. So, they are both chosen by God to help us to enlighten our mind, to learn and understand the word of the God in the Bible. So emperors, therefore, were expected to rule in accordance with Christian principles and to follow the Pope's advice. So they are looking forward that emperors will lead to the Christian principles and also to follow the church, the Pope's advice. So next is church and state reach a compromise. So Henry V, the church and the new Roman emperor reached a compromise in the city of Worms in Germany. So he was the new Roman emperor, reached a compromise city in Germany. Then, according to the Pope, is lower than God but higher than man, judges all, and is judged by no one. So according to them, they are lower than God but they are higher than man. So we all know that God is irreplaceable, but hindi na din natin sila kayang tumbasan because they are also powerful than us, that we need to follow their rules and advice. So judges all and is judged by no one. So they can make mistakes in all things, but themselves cannot be judged and evaluated by others. Next, in Christian Europe expands, Byzantine Empire, middle class reduced big gap between rich and poor. So, big gap between rich and poor in the middle class. Then, decline of urbanism less severe than in the West. So, in manorial system, grew out of need for self-sufficiency and self-defense. So, lumaki sila ng they need to be self-sufficiency and self-defense. Kahit naman sa sarili natin, we need this also. Lord had almost unlimited power over his workers. So, Lord had almost unlimited power. So, alam naman natin na ginagawa ni Lord lahat para sa atin. Then, feudalism, need for military security led to stir up bigger horses, armor, and weapons. So, they need this sa pakikipagdigma than expensive required land. So, lastly, the Crusades. So, series of Christian military campaigns against Muslim in Eastern Mediterranean. So, ito yung between against sa Muslim and sa Christian. So, merong factors, church sanctioned warfare. So, pinahihintulutan ng simbahan ang pagkikipagdigma. So, commercial opportunities, then adventure, then the impact of crusades is increased hostilities between Christians and Muslims. So, nang dahil sa crusades, nag-increase pa yung bitterness between sa Christians and Muslims. So, Pope's power strengthened but then weakened. So, Europeans became curious about the world. So, nang dahil sa crusades, yung impact is naging curious pa yung Europeans sa world. That's all.
Hi everyone, my name is JP Datuata. So, my report is the culture of medieval Europe. C1. The interest in learning revives. Learning continues outside Christian Europe. During the High Middle Age, trade brought Western Europeans into contact with the civilization of the Byzantine Empire and the Muslim world. During the High Middle Age, ang mga Western Europeans is nakikipagkalakalan sila sa pamamagitan ng sibilisasyon ng Byzantine Empire and the Muslim world. Next, C1, interest in learning revives. Medieval universal developed. In Europe, the rise of towns and the middle class encouraged the revival of learning. Sa Europe, hinihikayat yung mga tao na i-revive yung kanilang way ng pag-aaral. Sa anong paraan? So, siyempre, kapag ang goal natin is i-revive yung way ng pag-aaral, siyempre, nandoon yung inaasahang guro na magaling, matalino, nandoon yung inaantay mo na matututunan mo kasi hindi mo pa natututunan sa iba. So, yun. And then, pangalawa is, isa sa pangunahing tinitingnan para malaman kung na-revive na ba talaga ang way ng pag-aaral. Yung standard ng school. So, kapag ang goal natin is mas ma-improve pa yung way ng ating pag-aaral is kailangan yung maraming proyekto. Halimbawa na lamang yung pagpapatayo ng building sa school. And then, kapag magpapatayo tayo ng proyekto is nandoon yung tawag na effort, nandoon yung pagkikisa, nandoon yung presensya. And then, pinaka number 1 doon yung pera. Aanhin natin yung dami ng tao kung wala naman tayong pera pambili ng mga gamit. 'Di ba? Useless pa rin. Ito yung pinaka number 1 na nagpapagalaw, nagpapadali sa lahat ng mga gawain. Kasi makukuha mo lahat. So yun po yung interest in learning or medieval universal developed. Next, Thomas Aquinas, the most brilliant scholastic, a member of the Dominican order of monks in the 13th century. So, si Thomas Aquinas, the most brilliant scholastic sa larangan ng edukasyon. So, siya ay isang philosopher. So, siya ay isang kasapi during the 13th century. So, ayon kay Saint Thomas Aquinas or Thomas Aquinas, isinulat niya ang Summa Theologica. Summa Theologica use Aristotle's method of logic to examine and explain certain points in church teaching. Summa Theologica, dito nakapaloob lahat ng turo ng simbahan. Pinag-aralan dito yung relationship ng tao at sa Diyos. So, Summa Theologica, ito yung nagbibigay ng enlightenment sa mga tao. Nagbibigay ng liwanag. Nagbibigay ng ningning para sa mga taong madilim ang kanilang mundo. Yung Summa Theologica, Ito yung nagpapaliwanag, Ito yung humihikayat. Ito yung nag-i-encourage ng mga tao na mas lalo pang malapit yung kanilang relationship between sa simbahan at lalong-lalo na sa Diyos. Next, C1, interest in learning revives. So, pakitsek po, Albertus Magnus pa yan. Okay, the greatest naturalist among medieval scholars, the teacher of Thomas Aquinas at the universities in Tours and Cologne. So, si Albertus Magnus is, bukod sa isang obispo, pari, doktor sa simbahan, ay siya ang kauna-unahang guro ni Saint Thomas Aquinas. Next, Roger Bacon, an English Franciscan monk and philosopher, studied Muslim writings on light rays, performed experiments on optics, and observed the light traveled faster than sound. Si Roger Bacon is isang English Franciscan monk, philosopher, nag-aaral ng language ng mga Muslim writings, and isa sa pinakasikat na kanyang eksperimento yung tinatawag niyang mas mabilis pa daw ang takbo ng ilaw kaysa sa tunog. So yun po yung kanyang goal. Next, C2, new style in art. Art Nouveau, ornamental style of art that flourished between about 1890 and 1910 throughout Europe and the United States. Is characterized by its use of a long sinus organic line and was employed most often in architecture, interior design, jewelry, and glass design, poster, and illustration. So, Art Nouveau in French word, nouveau in English, new style in art. So, ang Art Nouveau is unang napublish during the time of 1890 and 1910 sa Europe at saka United States. So, ang ibig iparating ng Art Nouveau is tungkol sa art, design, painting, sculpture, architecture. Ang Art Nouveau is hindi lamang siya tumutukoy sa panloob or sa labas, kundi all around. Kasi ayon sa pag-aaral, kung ang mga bagay na kaya natin i-identify, tukuyin, is matatawag natin art. Kasi mayroon siyang design. So yun po yung art. So kung makikita natin, yan po yung halimbawa sa picture. C2, new style in art. In England, the style immediate precursor were the aestheticism of the illustrator Aubrey Beardsley, who depended heavily on the expressive quality of organic line, and the arts and craft movement of William Rist, who established the importance of a vital style in the applied art. So,
Good day, I'm Mahir Karudi and this is my report about end of the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages is the middle period of the three traditional divisions of Western history. The first is the classical antiquity, the medieval period, and the modern period. Medieval period was subdivided into early, high, and late ages. Population decline, counter-urbanization, collapse of centralized authority, invasions, and mass migrations of tribes which had begun in late antiquity continued in the early Middle Ages. The 7th century, North Africa and the Middle East, once part of the Byzantine Empire, came under the rule of Umayyad Caliphate. The Code of Justinian. It is the empire's law code, also known as Corpus Juris Civilis. During the High Middle Ages, the population of Europe increased greatly as technological and agricultural innovations allowed trade to flourish. The outstanding achievements toward the end of this period and into the late Middle Ages. The theology of Thomas Aquinas, the painting of Giotto, poetry of Dante and Chaucer, travels of Marco Polo, and the Gothic architecture of cathedrals as chartas. The late Middle Ages was marked by difficulties and calamities, including famine, plague, and war, which significantly diminished the population of Europe. Cultural and technological developments transformed European society, concluding the late Middle Ages and beginning of the early modern period. So, the next is the Dark Age. The concept of the Dark Age originated in the 1330 with the Italian scholar Petrarch. The Dark Ages is a historical periodization traditionally referring to the Middle Ages, about 5th to 15th century. The term employs traditional light versus darkness imagery. The concept of the Dark Age originated in the 1330 with the Italian scholar Petrarch. So what is the Petrarch? It's regarded the post-Roman centuries as dark compared to the light classical antiquity.